this time we're going to be talking about things that have happened in the vehicle when you've been a passenger or a driver and they were uncomfortable, and how did you deal with them? Adrian, I think you had a couple of examples.
Yeah, I got a few. One was I was driving with my friend. He just got his Jeep and he had like a Benz, an old Benz, maybe like a 2009 Benz, and he wanted to test it out. The thing is, he didn't tell me he wanted to test it out. He just did it. So we were driving from like, it was from Oakville to somewhere in Etobicoke. So it was about like a 40-minute drive with traffic. And on this road, we were taking the 403. It was pretty clear. There's enough room to like maneuver between cars. And he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, you ever been in a car like this before? Like, have you ever felt that rush?" I'm like, "No, and I don't think I want to. Like, I'm good, Let's just get there safely." And he's like, "Okay, no, just watch this." I'm like, No, I'm good." Like, "No, just watch this." So he just puts his foot to the metal and he's going about like 150, weaving between cars, going in. By the way, he's not my friend no more. But he's going in between cars. He did it for a good like 4 minutes. And I was like, yo, that's not cool. Because one, passenger or not, I don't think doing that is safe for you. It's not cool, never was cool. And you're just making everyone else on the road feel like they have to be defensive for no reason, really. And luckily, there was a car that was able to brake suddenly that provoked him to stop. And then, he finally like slowed down. But yeah, there was like no consent, and just reckless. And I feel like this whole need for speed, that kind of just takes over you. And there's not much to say about it from the fact that like you have no control and you just hope you survive it, really. You just hope people, young teens, young adults realize that driving like this doesn't get you anywhere, but in terrible collisions or really sticky situations that you don't want to even be in. And I think that should be spoken out more, should be taught more, should be embedded in a lot of our heads so that, we can change the future of driving and make these roads more safer. Really.
I agree with you completely. It's what about you, Adriana? A situation where you were very uncomfortable, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, I have a couple situations. The one in the car that I know being like the most uncomfortable is when one of my again ex-friends now like locked me inside of his car. We were just driving late at night. We pulled into like a parking lot, and then he just was like, "I'm not taking you home." Like he just locked me in the car. And like I was paralyzed. I was like, because we were friends, right? So I was like, okay. So I actually called, I put 911 on my phone, and I was about to dial, and I was like, if you don't take me home right now, I'm gonna call the police. And then he brought me home. But I remember that was probably one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've had in a car, where that was just shock for me. I'm glad I was able to like be smart enough to pull out my phone and like vocalize something in the moment. Yeah. But like that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So, damn, that's crazy. Good thing you got out of that situation. But if he were to not let you out or drive you home, what would be your next call to action? I told him I was gonna break the window. That was like what I said. I was like, I have my TTC card on me, and I'll break the window right now. Right. And that like was like, oh, okay. Didn't realize that you were afraid. And then he brought me home. Like he didn't even realize. Like it was like something was just off in that moment. But either way, I was like, okay, cool. But like in my head, I was like, okay, it's like 1 a.m. Nobody's up. Like my friends aren't awake to like call them. So the only thing I could think of was like potentially calling the police. Like I was like, otherwise I'm gonna be like stranded. Like I don't really know where we are, that kind of stuff. That was not a good situation. And I remember after I came home, I told my parents, and after that, every single time I went out, they would be like a little panicked, and they'd be like, okay, our ringers are on. Like if you're going out, like please.
But you know what? I would never have thought about that. We're talking about safety in cars. I'm thinking more about the type of story that Adrian's talking about, where somebody's speeding and zigzagging in and out of traffic, not using the car to actually trap somebody. And that hadn't even occurred to me. And so what do? I think you did exactly the right thing. Threatened to call 911, which you were fully prepared to, or 911. Yeah. I watch too many British movies where it's 999, you know?
992.
Yeah.
Might be
But
waiting a while.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that's
like you don't
scary.
think of it. Like if you can't get out of the car, what do? You think of like the cars around you, but your number like, oh, if I can't get out of this car, what's the situation? I feel like that's something that people like when they take Ubers often feel like, oh, I'm trapped in a car with someone who I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Like what could I do if the situation goes wrong, right? Which is it's a different level of like not feeling safe. But I think like you said, like just being prepared to call 911 if that happens, or like holding your own. Because I've even seen
well, and I think you said, or someone said before about taking a picture of the license plate before you get in. At least with an Uber, you have that information, right? But in a taxi or a friend's car, that would be a little trickier.
Yeah.
But yeah, it hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah. Then like other situations, oh, that's my late. There we go. Yeah, I know like the other situations because I'm the one in my friend group who I got my license first. Like I got my G right away and no one else has really gotten it. I've always driven. So now that some of them have their license, like it can be hard to give over control when you have experience and you see them making mistakes. So like I remember one time I was in the car with one of my friends and again, like he just like no seatbelts. He wasn't telling people to put on their seatbelts. He was speeding. Like I was there like this holding on. We were going to like a party, I think, just down the street. And he was like putting people in the trunk of the car, trying to get them to drive. And I remember when I got there, I called my parents. I was like, you're picking me up because I'm not going back home with the person I came with. But like, I remember that I felt extremely uncomfortable, especially because I was like, I know how I would be if I was driving and I wouldn't be doing these things. So like watching someone who just got their license being like, oh, like I think the phrase I heard was, you only have to drive properly until you pass your test. And then after that, you can do what you want. Like,
yeah, well, sadly, I've heard that before too, you know, now I can really drive.
now I can really do what I want. And that to me, I remember being freaked out. I know when my friends drive, I always tell them, like, if I'm driving, if I'm doing something that you're not comfortable with, let me know because you're the passenger. Like, you don't have control. And I'm not going to take offense. Like, backseat driving can be dangerous when someone's dictating to you. But I'm like, if I'm going too fast and not realizing it, or if I start driving and you haven't put your seatbelt on and I forget, just say something and I'll adjust because like I understand what it's like when you don't have the control in the situation.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a funny one about seatbelts. I'll come back to that one. Jessica, what would you like to share?
Well, I think Adriana brings up a good point about being the first in the friend group to get their license because I have a very early birthday. So I was lucky enough to get my license quite early. And I think, you know, being one of the first in the friend group, it wasn't until I got my license that I realized how much responsibility comes with driving. And especially, you know, I want my passengers to be safe. And although I know that there is a law that by a certain age, a seatbelt is your responsibility, I do believe that as a driver, you should ensure the safety of your passengers is number one priority. Mine is not so much, I guess, extravagant as Adriana's story. But a big thing for me is feet on the dashboard, which I know is something that we had talked about quite a lot. But for me, it really just irks me because you never know what's going to happen and you can only control your vehicle. You cannot anticipate or control what anybody else on the road is doing, especially when you're on the highway, whether it's a busy road, whether it's a country road, you have no idea. And a crash could happen right before your eyes. And once your feet are on the dashboard, that's the end of that. So I do have one of my friends who loves to do that. And she knows every time I give her the look, feet down, shoes on, and that is the end of that. We are not even, I will not move the car unless all the seatbelts are on and hands and feet inside the vehicle properly.
At all times.
I completely agree. Yeah, no, I mean, it matters, right? It's everything is fun. And I read so many stories and I've talked to so many people who have been involved in serious crashes. And the story's always the same. Oh, my song came on the radio. We were all laughing. It was the greatest until it wasn't, right? In a flash, something changes. And if you haven't done up your seatbelt, if you haven't packed the car properly, that's when you know, it all goes out the window. And if you're the driver, you're responsible. Whatever happens, you're responsible. But my funny story, because seatbelts, I mean, are absolutely important, and letting anyone ever ride in the trunk or on the floor or share seatbelts. Young people do it all the time, and it's incredibly dangerous. But we were at the airport, my husband, my daughter, Emily, and I. We were coming back from a trip. We had all our luggage and everything, and we were at Pearson, and there was a big long lineup of cabs, right? So the cab comes up, we put all our luggage in and everything. And the driver, we do up our seatbelts, and that means in cabs too, because cab drivers, of course, some of them are not very good drivers. So anyway, we're all buckled in and the cab driver doesn't do up a seatbelt. And so I said, excuse me, would you please do up your seatbelt? He said, I don't have to. And I said, well, and the reason is because in the event of a serious crash, everybody who isn't belted becomes a projectile. And there are situations where the driver or a passenger who's unbelted can actually injure or kill other people in the car because they bounce around at really high speeds. So anyway, he said, no, I don't have to. And I said, well, I really feel uncomfortable with you not being buckled up. And he said, fine, slammed on the brakes, pulled over, and made us get our luggage out of his car. And this was at the airport. So we had to carry our luggage back to the front of the line and get in another one. And I did follow up with a complaint to the airport. And apparently that's a rule that cab drivers do not have to be buckled into seatbelts. And the idea is that somebody could attack them with a knife and they might have to get out of the car in a hurry. But what is more likely in my head? What is more likely, that you would be attacked with a knife and have to get out of the car in a hurry, or that you would be involved in a collision where you could be seriously injured by the airbag or by something else in the vehicle? And
I something like that, maybe we should be a little bit more concerned about airport security at that point. If that is becoming a more probable scenario, I think that there are bigger issues that we should be looking at.
And now I believe there's like a divider because of COVID, right? So the chance of
possibly they have the plexiglass dividers. I can't say because I haven't been in a taxi in quite a while.
Yeah, so like potentially that's even less of a risk now of someone jumping out of their seat if we were physically separated now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do feel for them, and I can understand that there is some risk to that position, but I think the passenger safety is important too.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking like, has he experienced that before? Has it been more common during that time?
He was just a fairly arrogant fellow. It was his whole demeanor. I don't think it had anything to do with his personal safety because his was, I don't have to get out. Right. So we got out and then it was afterwards that the airport came back and said, this is the rule and this is why it's a rule.
It's an interesting rule because like you would assume that they would have to abide by like the rule of the wherever they're driving, not necessarily like the airport complex's rules. Unless they have a special license.
I don't. I think it's an MTO rule for traffic or what. I don't really know. I just know of whatever body governs that they have a clause where they aren't included in that. Yeah, I don't think it's the airport rule. I think it's the cab company or whatever but it would be okay with MTO because they wouldn't. Otherwise, they would be ticketed all the time, right?
It's interesting because I know with like Ubers, you would have to wear your seatbelt. Like the exception is not, it doesn't lie there either. So it seems very like taxi specific.
I've asked Uber drivers not to use their cell phone when I'm in the vehicle too, but it is hard. It's really hard. I mean, to speak up and.
My driving instructor used to be on his phone while I was driving. He used to take calls while I was learning how to drive, and I'd be like, "Can I go? Like, I don't know what I'm doing." And I feel
I find with driving instructors, it's the worst. I feel like they're almost, at least with my experience, he was never paying attention. I think one time he almost fell asleep. And it's like, I'm a new driver who, this is maybe a common sense scenario to you, but unfortunately for me, I don't know what to do on a red turn at a red light.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, they're supposed to be the second set of eyes on the road, right? They're supposed to be watching and assessing what you're doing, warning you of what's happening, and helping you interact with traffic and properly. So by not paying attention is bad enough. And I did have, because I always ask young people, what their experience was with driving school. And one young lady said, well, her instructor kept falling asleep. And I said, well, what did your parents say? And she said, well, I didn't tell them because they paid a lot of money for the instruction. So I didn't want to disappoint them. But she said also, like, I kind of took it as he was that comfortable with my driving that he felt he could just have a little nap. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's not the point. He's supposed to be there, or she, because I'm a driving instructor, all right, whatever, I am certified. I mean, they're supposed to be there to, coach you and, be the eyes of what's happening. They're the experienced people, so that really makes me mad.
I remember that being my thought process too. Oh, he must think I'm good enough now where he feels comfortable taking a phone call. Like, I remember that's how I was justifying it in the moment. I was like, okay, it's a sign that I'm doing well.
Well, but when you're taking those lessons, you're 16, 17, your brain really doesn't mature until about age 25. So it's, if you don't know what you don't know, and young people make a lot of assumptions, and why not? He's just that comfortable. I'm doing such a great job. He can have a little nap.
Yeah.
No. We need to keep a better eye on that too.
Yeah.
So, any other situations you want to discuss?
Mine wasn't necessarily inside the vehicle, but it kind of relates back to Adriana's story about a party. And it was actually after a wedding. And, I think it made me also realize, Amory, I know you were discussing how hard it is sometimes to speak up. Me and a couple of my cousins, we were going to a wedding, and the cousin who was supposed to be driving ended up having, I would say, a couple of drinks. I can't say I was really counting, but it was at that point that I didn't feel that, she was supposed to be driving me home. I didn't feel comfortable enough to have that happen. The wedding was also not here in Canada. It was in New York. So, I'm now young. I think I was about 15 at the time. I am now in a place that I don't know. And I'm also now not comfortable with the person who's going to be driving me. And, I went up to her and said, I'm not comfortable. And I had, she wasn't to a point where she was too intoxicated that she wasn't compliant. But I had actually ordered a taxi that was going to come pick us up. And we ended up taking a taxi back to the hotel. And although she hadn't been in a state of, intoxication where she wasn't compliant and she got angry or aggressive, although that didn't happen, I still think it is important when you're not feeling comfortable to say something. And, although it's maybe not a fun conversation to have with your family member, who knows if she had driven home that night, who knows what would happen.
That's right. That's right. And see, that's another problem. It's like the fireman who, does a campaign about smoke alarms, right? You can't prove how many crashes didn't happen. You can only count the fires that did happen, right? And so that's a problem with prevention. It's people don't necessarily pay enough attention, because if it's averted, nobody ever knows, right? But very likely something horrible could have happened that night. Another point that you made there, Jessica, that's really important is that people don't have to be sloppy, staggering, slurring, drunk to be impaired. And anyone who's had a couple of drinks, sometimes even one drink, I mean, the amount of alcohol in each drink and over, it has to do with your body size. It has to do with how much sleep you've had, what you've eaten. It's very complicated. But the best rule is designated driver, no alcohol, no mind altering, whatever drugs, stone cold sober. And good for you for speaking up, because you don't know what could have happened. But hard too in that situation where it's a family member and you're in a foreign place that you're not familiar with, and it's about options, right? You knew you had the option of calling a cab. So, and you made sure everybody else got back.
Sorry.
No, that's
cutting
good.
you off. I was going to say it's important to say too, because, you know, it wasn't like I was old enough even to drive myself. I was 15. So it does go to show you that there are other options other than just letting the individual drive. You know, there's cabs, there's Ubers, anything else really than having the person. The horse sometimes.
Yeah.
if-
All right, that was to Adrian.
That one was
Okay.
to Adrian. You see, I just threw that one in there.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
But making sure you have either a credit card that you can use for that or a little bit of cash that you can use for that in the event that something comes up and you do need to find an emergency way home.
Absolutely.
Okay. So thank you all very much again. And just a few of the possible scenarios and the importance of really planning ahead and knowing you have options and speaking up when you need to, because we did a campaign about this before and there's no reset button. In the event that something goes sideways, you can't just take it over. There's no do-over, right? It's make sure you make good choices every time you go out. And have fun. So thank you.
Thank you.